This episode is brought to you by Amazon. Sometimes the most painful part of getting sick is the getting better part. Waiting on hold for an appointment, sitting in crowded waiting rooms, standing in line at the pharmacy, that's painful. Amazon One Medical and Amazon Pharmacy remove those painful parts of getting better with things like 24/7 virtual visits and prescriptions delivered to your door. Thanks to Amazon Pharmacy and Amazon One Medical, healthcare just got less painful.
At Sierra, discover top workout gear at incredible prices, which might lead to another discovery. Your headphones haven't been connected this whole time. Awkward. Discover top brands at unexpectedly low prices. Sierra, let's get moving.
I'm Stephen Metcalf, and this is the Slate Culture Gabfest Dying for Sex and Living in Malls edition. It's Wednesday, April 9th, 2025. On today's show, Michelle Williams stars as a woman who, after being diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, leaves her husband and goes on a sexual quest. The show stars Jenny Slate as her confidant and best friend. You can find it on Hulu. And then the documentary Secret Mall Apartment tells the story of a band of impish art school kids who took up illegal residence in a behemoth mall for 4 years. It's directed by Jeremy Workman. And finally, the singer-songwriter Lucy Dacus has a new album. We discuss Forever is a Feeling with Slate's own Carl Wilson. But first, I'm joined by Sam Adams, you're kind of senior everything, writer, editor.
Senior everything is my official title.
You are, yes, exactly. And very...
Sage, all around sage of Slate.
Sage, esteemed old friend of the program. So, COFOP, I guess. But it's lovely to see you face to face in person.
It is lovely to be here.
Yeah, it'll be fun to talk with you. And of course, Dana Stevens is the film critic for Slate. Hey, Dana.
Hey.
Let's talk. Let's talk culture.
Stuff that's on screens and on pages.
And in earbuds, yeah. All right, well, the limited series Dying for Sex stars Michelle Williams, as I said, is the real-life podcaster Molly Kochen, who was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer in 2015, and she has since passed away. Soon after the diagnosis, she left her husband and went on a sexual vision quest in search of her first orgasm during sex before it was too late. She takes to online hookup sites, explores what are for her new and exotic kinks. That story is now told in the series Dying for Sex on Hulu. It was co-created by Kim Rosenstock and Elizabeth Merriweather, the latter of whom created the New Girl sitcom, and also The Dropout, the mind-bendingly good show about Elizabeth Holmes starring Amanda Seyfried. So it comes
and also, sorry, go ahead.
No, go.
She also co-created Obvious Child with Jenny Slate, which pertains to this show, because Slate co-stars in it.
Look at you. Thank you. Yes, exactly. Anyway, so a lot of pedigree here. As I said, Jenny Slate is Nikki Boyer, plays the character Nikki Boyer based on to hear the actor Esco Joulet. I'm going to say Joulet because of the accent. Is that an aigu there?
That is
Dana?
an aigu. Accent aigu.
Plays Sonia, a palliative care therapist with whom Molly is consulting after receiving her tragic diagnosis. Let's listen.
I've never even had an orgasm with another person. And now I'm gonna die.
Good. Molly. Hey. We have something for your list. Orgasm with another person. Yeah.
Dana, you sent around a wonderful article about the career of Michelle Williams. This is obviously an interesting turn for her. What did you make of this show and its mix of intense grief and impending sense of loss and camaraderie and silliness?
Oh my God, this show is so doing it for me. I'm not done yet. I'm now 6. I think I'm just about to start episode 6 of 8. And I've started consuming them slowly because I know that the last episode is obviously going to be inevitably sad. But I think what struck me so much, Sam, when you floated the idea of doing this topic this week, I asked you, okay, so how depressing are we talking? You had already started, I think, watching it at that point. And I just didn't want to bring something onto the show that was just pure bleakness and grief. Okay, this show is so far from that. I mean, it really is not so much a show about dying and grief as it is about something that everyone has to contend with whether you're dying or not, which is sort of how do you make the most of the time that you have? And how do you continue to grow and change and find new things to want and desire and enjoy, no matter how much future you have ahead of you? And I think the show is so great. It's striking the tone that it needs to strike to have the gravity that it needs to tell the story of someone who's dying way too young. And also the sense of humor and silliness and kinkiness and weirdness to make it about a specific person and their specific desires, which of course is what universalizes things, right? To make them as specific as you can. As I think we read somebody writing about it, although a female friendship is at the center of the show, and both Michelle Williams and Jenny Slate are so good and so believable as friends, have so much chemistry as a friendship couple, it's not one of those, it's not Sex and the City. It's not sort of a rosy idealization of female friendship. It really is about two people that are sort of struggling to figure out how to have boundaries with each other. And in fact, you could critique their friendship for being too unboundaried in some ways. But I just can't believe all the brave things this show is doing and exploring, including some really, really dark childhood trauma in the Michelle Williams character's life, while being incredibly funny and silly and sexy. So I'm so into it. And I really encourage people to watch it, even if they think like, woman dying of cancer, I can't handle that right now. It actually will bring you much more light than you think.
Yeah, I love this show too. It's funny that you bring up Sex and the City because it's actually a reference to that right at the beginning when Esco Jule's character, who we heard from, is sort of formulating this plan with Michelle Williams, who is, broken up with her husband, who is basically J. Duplassing as hard as a person can possibly J. Duplass, being her, incredibly sensitive, loving, caring husband who nonetheless cannot bring himself to sort of physically touch her or be intimate with her because that connection reminds him of the fact that she's going to die, which is the last thing that she wants to think about all the time. So she breaks up with him, decides she's going to go out on this sexual journey, and Esco Jule says, well, you old millennials, you learn about sex from Samantha and you think it's just sort of missionary position penetration, and you actually need to broaden your horizons and think about it as just really kind of getting to know your body in a way, which is something that both sex and death do. And I think that's really what the show becomes about. It's about, it's a woman's journey of erotic exploration, but it's also just about the fact that sex is kind of weird and awkward and funny, and it really leans into all those aspects of it. There's a part in the last episode, and we can give away the ending of the show because we know that the protagonist is going to die, where Michelle Williams' character is being kind of walked through what death is going to be like by her hospice nurse, played by Paula Pell. And she goes through it as she's like, look, this death is a process. There's a thing that your body knows how to do, like eating or going to the bathroom. Here are all the things that the various parts of your body are going to be doing. And it really demystifies it and puts her and the audience in touch with it in a very concrete way. We think of death as sort of, the end of our soul, the snuffing out of our, personality candle. And it's also just a thing that happens to your body. And so, the show's about a lot of things, but I think it's, fundamentally about the fact that we are these, sort of lofty intellectual presences with all these goals and dreams. And then we're also in these like big stupid bodies that never do what we want them to do, including not dying. And I think it's a very funny, but also, of course, very moving by the end of it way of just, putting us in touch with that basic truth.
Yeah, and that the route from our lofty overthinking and our Calvinist hangover back to our corporeal nature is often through a pretty fucking kinked toes, which is, it's not just that you then do the animal thing and you get rid of all of this kind of edifice built on top of your animality of conscience and doubt and self-awareness that no other animal in the kingdom has. You have to find what path will get you there, which is part of the substance of the show. I mean, she has to work her way through various men and various situations in order to complete, one hopes, the journey to an orgasm during some form of coitus with another human being. I hate to admit this, right? Everything I think you've both said about the show, I'm totally convinced by. Everything that I saw on paper about the show going in, I was enthusiastic about. The two lead actresses in particular, Michelle Williams and Jenny Slate, and the concept of the show, the supporting cast of the show, all of it. And the truth is, I didn't enjoy the show. I can only be honest about that. I actually found the heart of the show almost has to be the relationship between the two women, and I found their camaraderie actually quite forced. I thought I was watching this is terrible to use a sports metaphor for this, but I was watching a tremendously gifted Gold Glove shortstop and a tremendously gifted Gold Glove second baseman just not figure out each other's rhythm and how to turn the double play seamlessly. So pardon me for the male saturated homosocial metaphor for something that is so opposite that, but take that for what you will. But and so I found myself constantly coming up against the self-awareness and the self-consciousness, ironically, that has kept her from enjoying her own physicality in some sense. And then the other thing I would say is, and this is a confession, right? Like, I don't mean this as a definitive judgment. This is a very specific, or has become, I think, a very specific genre, understandably so. A woman is in a marriage that is both, her relationship with her husband is both a cage and something that renders her invisible in some sense to herself. Like, the invisibility of her to him is reflected in her own self-esteem in ways that have become tragic, and she has to leave. I believe that's a very real situation, and these genres are meant to answer for it. So, for example, Eat, Pray, Love, All Fours by Miranda July, the blockbuster novel, and now this. I have some skepticism about the genre, in part because I think what it sometimes does is, how to put it, because the marriage is so effectively portrayed as horrific, leaving is seen as a panacea, and the ways in which that does or doesn't get complicated by a work often makes it fail or succeed for me in some sense. And just one quick word about Jay Duplass. What I find so interesting about his performance is that it's actually a marvelously written character in a very precise sense. It's not just his inability to be erotic with her, which actually precedes the most recent diagnosis. So there's a deep problem with sexuality in the marriage. It's his generosity is completely bound up in his habit of blotting her out as an autonomous and feeling human being, which is really painful to watch because actually he's, in a way, he's trying so hard to help his wife through it. But in this very masculine way, he's kind of imperially overtaking the process of her treatment and diagnosis and inevitable decline in ways that just reinforce everything that's self-centered and annihilating about his personality. So I see the wisdom of the show and admire it. I love all the people involved with it, including, Merriweather, the creator. It just didn't have that galvanism that I wished it did that made me enjoy it and want to watch more of it. I watched 3 of them and then found myself unable to go to a 4th.
First, I just want to respond to the double play thing that I 100% disagree.
Yeah, no, of course.
For what it's worth, I really do think the two of them seem like friends and seem like they have a long-standing, flawed friendship. And I would watch a separate fanfic show about the prequel of their friendship and how they met and how long they've known each other because they both seem so real to me. But the main thing I wanted to answer of what you just said, and I think it's something the show sets out to do on purpose. I think Liz Merriweather has maybe talked about this too, is that they really didn't want to make it a feminist show in which the dudes were bad. The dudes were the bad guys. Yeah. And it very much isn't that. For example, the doctor character, who I love, there's this older doctor who is, the sort of the main cancer doctor who's treating Michelle Williams' character. And yes, he's out of touch with his emotions. He's sort of overly busy and gruff in the way most doctors are. But he's also like a real guy. He's not a bad guy. And there's a really, really sweet scene pretty far into the show where Michelle Williams' character tries to get the doctor to just sit with her quietly for a minute and breathe, literally do a breathing exercise with her. The actor is hilarious. Wait, let me look up who he is.
It's David Rash.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. From Succession.
Yes.
Yeah, I knew I recognized him. Of course, it's Carl. Right. He's fantastic. He's so funny and so real as this sort of stiff dude, but who's trying. He's trying to be empathetic. He's trying to understand his patient. Similarly, Rob Delaney, who has a fantastic role as Michelle Williams' character's next-door neighbor, who ends up getting involved in some of her kink practices, is a total slob. He's constantly leaving his trash outside his door. He's doing all kinds of sort of, chauvinistic dude things. But he's also one of the most sensitive and attuned characters in the show, it turns out. So I feel like this show's vision of heterosexuality, because it is pretty much heterosexual sex that she's pursuing, is kind of different from the way a lot of those, that genre that you're talking about. I haven't read all 4s, but the way that kind of genre often presents a male-female heterosexual marriage or relationship, which is sort of dude oppresses, woman must liberate herself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a scene early on after she's left her husband and she has decided that she's, rented out this expensive hotel room on his credit card, bought herself a sort of high-end vibrator, and is going to go, meet some guy in this hotel room for sex. And she chickens out of meeting the guy and just goes up into the hotel room with the vibrator and then basically uses it until it sort of overheats and shorts out. But the stuff that she's masturbating to, I think there's sort of conventional porn in there. But at one point, it's the scene from the movie Speed where Keanu first calls Sandra Bullock's character by her first name. And she's like, call her Annie, call her Annie, call her Annie. And then it's like footage of clownfish like swimming through sea anemones or something like that. So it's just, it's not even all naked bodies or like other, it's just sort of situations and emotions. And I guess eventually with the fish, just like textures. But yeah, again, it's sort of this idea that like your body, like you don't know what it responds to. And with the Rob Delaney character, this guy is like so kind of gross and disgusting. He walks around in these sort of undershirts with holes in them and like eats drippy sandwiches in the elevator. And she's completely repelled by him and also like super turned on in a way that she kind of doesn't get. And they have this sort of there are a lot of relationships that she gets into that are built around sort of, domination and submission dynamics and a lot of that. And it becomes very much, and this ties in with the sort of childhood trauma that you mentioned, Dana, just about kind of control, both asserting it and feeling safe giving it up, which is so much a part of any kind of intimacy. One thing I love about her relationship with Jenny Slate's character is that I think they comment on this early on, but then they just sort of keep it running through the show. One of the ways that it shows you how long these people have known each other, how close they are, is that they are, frequently curl up in bed. Michelle Williams' character is often sort of confined there by her illness. And she'll just sort of lay her hand on Jenny Slate's breast. And it's not sexual or even like noteworthy. It's just clearly that's how close they are. And that's just a little gesture of how sort of all the different ways bodies can function to bring us together.
I love that too. She says something like, your boob is like a warm cup of tea.
Yeah.
All right. Well, the show is Dying for Sex. It's on Hulu. I mean, mine is not a thumbs down. I want to clarify. It just isn't quite as, my feelings aren't as freely enthusiastic as yours. I have to work out my kinky way to those feelings, apparently. Anyway, check it out and let us know what you think.
Look at how many pictures of penises I'm getting. How did he get so hard in the middle of a forest?
It's like a sunflower bending toward the sun itself.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Are you on some kind of sex quest?
A sex quest?
Our next sponsor is Audible, and the occasion for the sponsorship is Sunrise on the Reaping, which is the new audiobook in the Hunger Games series by Suzanne Collins. We discussed, I think, the very first Hunger Games movie on this show. I read the whole original series, and my son has just started them. So this is, I remember, a very addictive world to join, and I'm now witnessing that in the next generation. So in Sunrise on the Reaping, you can hear Jefferson White narrate the story of the survivor, young Hamish Abernathy, and revisit the world of Panem 24 years before the original Hunger Games series. So it's a prequel. I use Audible all the time, and this book will be available there. Welcome to the 50th Hunger Games. Experience the worldwide best-selling series in a whole new way. Go to audible.com/sunrise and listen with the world.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Because Progressive offers discounts for paying in full, owning a home, and more. Plus, you can count on their great customer service to help you when you need it, so your dollar goes a long way. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save on car insurance. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations. All right, before we go any further, this is typically where we discuss business. Dana, what do you got?
Our only item of business, Steve, is just to tell listeners about our Slate Plus segment. Our Slate Plus segment this week was inspired by a listener question from a listener named Rhoda. She wanted to know whether we've ever revised our opinion about a work of art after learning that it was more heavily plagiarized, let's say, or more dependent on another source than was previously acknowledged. It's a great question, a complicated question about what intellectual property is and, what it means to be an artist who's recycling and reworking other artist creations. If you're a Slate Plus member, you will hear that segment separately on your feed from our main show. But if you're not a Slate Plus member, you better think about becoming one because you won't be sorry. How do you do it? You go to slate.com/cultureplus to sign up. When you do sign up, you get ad-free podcasts. You get lots of bonus content like the segment I just described, which many other shows offer as well. And of course, you get unlimited access to all of the great writing and podcasting on slate.com. So do us a favor and support our work by signing up at slate.com/cultureplus. You can also access it by clicking try free at the top of your Apple Podcast page.
The hook for the documentary Secret Mall Apartment is this: a group of young people secretly, illegally lived inside a mall for 4 years. A great hook, but deceptive. The movie is actually better and more interesting than that, in my opinion. Providence, Rhode Island is both home to RISD, the Rhode Island School of Design, and Brown University, two of the coolest cool kid schools in the English-speaking world. It's also one tough New England city, an old mill town that even as late as the late 1990s was trying to reinvent itself. Thanks to greedy developers and a corrupt mayor, the solution was to build a giant Pomo brutalist mall. It's a no-brainer, right? Staring you in the face that, divided wealthy white Providence from poor and largely brown Providence. In this same surge of mindless development, an artist squat in an old abandoned mill building got torn down. This is when one of the displaced artists, Michael Townsend, put two and two together and came up with like infinity, something so much more than four. Townsend somehow was familiar with the weird, skewed footprint of the new mall and understood there had to be a voidy non-space within its structure and knew exactly where to find it, improbably, and where, therefore, exactly to make as a kind of art project and civic statement in one, a secret hidden apartment. This remarkable documentary film is directed by Jeremy Workman, and it's produced by Jesse Eisenberg, who's developing quite a track record as a producer and director, in addition to actor. So as I say, it was a merry band of rogues that Townsend enlisted to do this. You're going to hear them talking after they've set up the apartment and starting to puzzle out how exactly it will work, including whether they'll sleep there, and if so, how. Let's listen.
It was trying on clothes, a funny kind of teenage mall hang existence.
We ate all the leftover food at the food court.
We saw almost every movie at the movie theater, which was awesome.
But as the sun set, we started to internalize the dilemma we put ourselves in, which is we have no plan. Where are we going to sleep?
Sam, let me start with you. What a gem. What do you think?
Yeah, I love this movie. Like you, Steve, I think I had a sort of impoverished idea of what this movie was going to be. It premiered, I think, at South by Southwest about a year ago, and it's basically framed as like, oh, these people made a secret mall apartment, and this one guy lived in it for years. And I thought it was going to be kind of a movie about like a weird squatter or something like that, some kind of real eccentric. And it is actually about this kind of conceptual art product that has, its roots in Providence's punk rock scene. Members of the band Lightning Bolts are among the interviewees here, and in the sort of warehouse district that was decimated by developers. And so, in one of their watchwords was, well, we have all this unused space that we have to use. So these group of artists were like, well, unused space. We found this weird little nook in the mall that no one's using. Let's use it. So over a period of 4 years, they lugged in, couches and cinder blocks and set up a PlayStation and stuff. And it's sort of this interesting mix between like a Duchamp ready-made and the mixed up files of Mrs. Basilie Frankweiler. Mm-hmm. Like it's this adventure that's also this piece of art that is designed to be lived in but kind of not seen. And that seems, I can maybe understand why the publicity campaign was not centered around that aspect, because it seems a little highfalutin or something. But it's actually kind of this great adventure that they're on. The movie ties it into some of the other art this group of Rhode Island artists did, which is more serious, a lot of which is centered around commemorating the victims of 9/11 and the Oklahoma City bombing. And this, among other things, became sort of a space where they would gather to plot those other projects, but also is sort of a place to recharge. It was really like this kind of free-floating niche carved out of a space that, one of the things that malls did is they basically commercialized the idea of congregation. You would get together with your friends at the mall to shop, and you might just, hang out in the food court or whatever, but it was entirely organized around commerce. So they basically took it as an act of rebellion just to earmark this space that you would get into by sort of wiggling through like a hole in the parking structure, or slithering through air ducts and a bunch of different ways, and just kind of colonize it in this exactly the opposite of a way women normally do that.
A roguish sleeper cell lodged in a mall. Dana, what is not to love?
Yeah, I mean, the title kind of says it all. Like, you want to watch a movie about a secret mall apartment? It's a secret apartment in a mall. But you're right, Sam, that there is much more. It does unfold beyond that. And it is kind of an incredible stroke of luck that this space, not just luck, I guess, because the creativity in part was discovering it as well. But it's a stroke of luck for us, the filmmakers, witnessing this moment of history, that it wasn't, just a guy hiding out, with his fast food, that it was that there were people who wanted to meet there and plot things and plan interesting other projects that they could do. I mean, it's hard to overstress how difficult it was to get the materials in to build this room that they built. There's an incredible segment about the concrete cinder blocks that they took up in order basically to conceal their space better, right? So that if somebody happened to come upon this empty, almost, pocket of space within the bowels of the mall, that they wouldn't just see the couch and the PlayStation and everything right there. But in order to get the concrete blocks in, they had to go while the mall was closed after hours and, climb up a industrial ladder carrying these heavy blocks. There's a really great moment where not a security guard, but I think an actual Providence cop sees this group of young people bringing cinder blocks to the mall at night. And Michael Townsend, who's sort of the ringleader of the group and kind of the main character of the movie, comes up with a lie in the moment to convince the cop why they have to be bringing these cinder blocks, that they're moving them to a different car because it made their car too heavy. And it works. Later, much later, they do get discovered. But that's just such a great, straight out of a thriller, right? The moment of nearly being captured and not. But I was just going to note that also with this movie, in a way that the creators couldn't have known at the time, becomes a document of the time it was made in, of the mid-aughts, because it's the pre-smartphone era. It's a moment when documenting your life was not something everyone did constantly. And yet there's an enormous amount. The reason we know how they got the cinder blocks up and the reason we have the encounter with the cop about the cinder blocks on film is that they had these little tiny digital cameras, which, as the movie shows, fit into an Altoids tin. And they just filmed a lot of their doings in and around the mall apartment. So it's one of those documentaries where you keep saying, I can't believe there's footage of this. It's old, grainy footage from a little old digital camera, but it's very cool that they recorded it at the time because they sort of knew that the project was ephemeral, right? They knew that at some point it was going to be discovered and end. And in the meantime, it seems to me that part of the art they were doing was just recording their own construction of the place.
Yeah, Dana, exactly. I mean, I loved this movie. It took me a little while to begin loving it deeply. And it happened, the transition happened when it went from the movie we'd been sold on to the movie it really is. And that moment is when suddenly you're seeing old archival, as you say, grainy video footage, not of this project, but another one that's in a kind of sewery, non-space, semi-submerged somewhere in Providence, like almost beneath an overpass or, but it's just a classic kind of apocalyptic seeming urban non-space filled with concrete detritus and where no one is supposed to be. And you see these, how to describe them, these astonishing human form, realistically human form sculptures, right? I don't know what the materials are, but kind of mannequin-like, but in this elaborate kind of cat's cradle-like suspended strings between structures. And it's an enormously provocative work. And they let you see it and that you get some voiceover of local artists. You had to find it. It was very hard to find. And even if you kind of knew where it was, you might not be able to find it. But it was like a whisper campaign, got people down there.
And it was anonymous. Nobody knew who made it.
And those who saw it never forgot it. And then the documentary tells you it was by this guy, Michael Townsend. And to that point, you don't have a sense of him as an artist. And all of a sudden, you're like, okay, this is a very profound human being, right, who's trying to do something with public spaces and public art, but in weirdly private and ephemeral ways. And from that moment on, it's extraordinary. And it's extraordinary as a portrait, yes, of this kind of very amusing prank, kind of, in a way, art prank, but also of Townsend, right? I mean, that's where the movie, to me, is utterly compelling. He's a charismatic. He was a teacher of many of these people who joined him in this, but he's a classic, charismatic pedagogue. He has a vision for what he wants to do with art. And without drilling down on it, but leaving it suggestive and interesting, his relationship to home is enormously troubled. Not troubled, but it's not uncomplicated because he was a military kid and he never lived anywhere for an extended period of time. And in some ways, this particular work arises out of his need to build and create a home, but also have it be something that you inevitably know you're going to abandon and don't actually live in, which produces a relationship problem that we see a tiny bit of on film. Anyway, I found it a improbably moving documentary. It's not just a series of laughs and like forehead slaps, like how did they do that? It's actually this actually is really a meditation on art and what the purpose of art is. And Sam, in addition to all the other remarkable things he does, he goes to a children's hospital with just massive amounts of rolls of colored tape, like green and blue colored tape. And he's found a way to make these, I don't want to reduce it to this, but Banksy-like kind of silhouettes and various other images using tape. So he makes these extraordinary murals that the kids find, they take a lot of heart from them and they participate in the process. So there's a profound sense of duty and decency to this artist. It's not pranks, actually. It's an attempt to do something more generous than that.
Right. There's a point in which someone, I think it might be Michael Townsend, says in the movie that as a way of conclusion that building the apartment was a way of living. It was not some produced object to be seen. And there is a real dedication to the participation, the process, and how that changes you just by virtue of taking part in it. There's a little, there's the sort of the standard captions at the end of the movie that tells you what's happened to everybody else. And it feels like the proudest one is it just tells you all the people who were involved in this thing are still working artists now. And that really seems like the conclusion of the movie. This wasn't something that like a Banksy ever was meant to wind up in a museum or go up for auction. It reminded me a little bit of the environmental art of Christo and Jean-Claude, like the gates in Central Park, where the idea was just to be in the gates. And that's like the sum total of the work. It has no other purpose than to be inhabited and experienced and then to go away. There is that interesting moment that you mentioned where there's vintage footage of the person who was and is no longer Michael Townsend's wife, where I think they're actually having the conversation in the food court of the mall, where he's talking about, how much he loves all the plans he has for the mall apartment and how he wants to, put in wooden floors and add a second room. And she's like, well, we also live in a house together and we're married and I would like to do some things with our house. And he kind of says like, well, yeah, but I'm having more fun with my friends doing this thing. And, they quite properly broke up because he was not into that. So there are some, shortcomings to this thing. The participants admit at one point that they would probably not have gotten away with this amazing story about moving cinder blocks if they weren't white. There's a certain kind of presumption of innocence that they benefit from in that environment. But nonetheless, I find this like really sort of, inspiring and enjoyable. And, especially in an era now, I think it's not only sort of pre-cell phone, Dana, but also just pre the uber monetization of like everything that we have now, where every piece of created content is some sort of branding exercise. And this is just the polar opposite of this. You weren't supposed to know who did this. You weren't even necessarily supposed to see it. Maybe you just got wind that this thing existed. Maybe you found out about it, 20 years later like we did. But it's really just kind of art in itself. And that I feel like is really something that I am moved to have even this much later experience through this film.
Yeah, and the connection of art and community, right? Just in the sense that I think one of the last images you see, along with a very, very moving moment where Michael Townsend goes back to the space. He's been legally banned from the mall since the discovery of this space. And now because of this movie, which I think is actually now showing at this mall in Providence, he was at least provisorily allowed back in. And so you see him opening with a key, this door that they created into the now empty space. And that's really moving. And then from there, we cut back to just a photograph of the group of the collective of 8 artists sitting in their old mall space. And it becomes as well just a movie about friendship and about this period in one's youth where you have a community of friends that feels more like a family than your actual family.
Yeah, and the poignancy of can this be due both to social media and gentrification and everything else? Could anything like this ever happen again? Young people will get up to shit, so let's say yes. Anyway, I loved this movie. I think we all did. It's Secret Mall Apartment. It's not as hard to find as The Secret Apartment, nor as a small indie movie might be. It's actually out and about, right? Sam, you saw it in Philly or?
Yeah, I mean, I was actually in North Carolina, so I was
right.
in Raleigh when I was there. Yeah, but it is a national release. I think it's often in kind of 1 or 2 theaters per state.
Yeah,
but it is all over the place, and I'm sure is going to end up on streaming somewhere soon as well.
Eventually, please seek it out. All right, moving on.
This is an incredible tale. Artists set up an apartment inside Providence Place Mall, going undetected for years.
We all hated the mall when it went up, right? Nobody wanted that to happen.
Shortly after, a developer comes in and says, I'm going to knock down your home.
I just had this idea. Oh, we should live in the mall.
Who doesn't love the good things in life? Everyone enjoys a little luxury, but luxury's not always affordable, except when it comes to Quince. Quince is the go-to for luxury essentials at affordable prices. As has often been the case when I'm talking about Quince on this show, I just sheerly by chance happen to be wearing a Quince item right now. Winter in New York has dragged on a bit this year. It's still chilly today in early April. And so I put on one of my Quince cashmere sweaters. Can you describe it, Steve?
How to put it? First of all, it has a lovely bunched turtleneck
It's
vibe
got one of
to
the
it.
Real stand-up turtlenecks. Like, I don't like the turtlenecks that sag. The perfect turtleneck are the turtlenecks worn by George Harrison in the Get Back documentary about the Beatles.
Can you flip it so it's singled over? And look at you.
I could go into it. I would be a true turtle and hide behind it.
Pull it up over your mouth and do like a Vogue shoot from the 70s. Like,
with big fake eyelashes. Totally.
It is a really remarkably fetching and self-respecting article of clothing.
Quince offers a range of such items. In fact, this is only one of 2 cashmere turtlenecks that I own from Quince, and I wear them both all the time. Best of all Quince items are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. That's because by partnering directly with top factories, Quince can cut out the cost of the middleman and pass the savings on to you. They also only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices and premium fabrics and finishes. Give yourself the luxury you deserve with Quince. Go to quince.com/culture for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/culture to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/culture.
If there's one thing to learn from the entertainment industry, it's just how easy it is to earn a reputation, even if it doesn't reflect who celebrities really are. For example, everybody thinks that Discover is a card that isn't widely accepted, but in reality, it's accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide. Yeah, 99%. So maybe now you'll think twice before judging a book by its cover. Unless it's a celebrity cookbook, in that case, judge away. Based on the February 2024 Nielsen report, learn more at discover.com/creditcard. The singer-songwriter Lucy Dacus was one of the trio Boygenius. That group, supergroup, really indie supergroup, broke out huge with their last album. Now Dacus has given us Forever Is a Feeling. We're joined by Carl Wilson, Slate's music critic. Fair, Carl, to say that Phoebe Bridgers is just kind of the anchor superstar of that trio, but now Dacus maybe is coming up hard behind her with this record especially?
Yeah, I mean, Phoebe definitely had the biggest public profile outside of the group of the 3 of them. And Julian and Lucy were a little bit more kind of cult artists. And this is Lucy Dacus getting signed to a major label and sort of post-Boygenius that they're all kind of stars now mutually. So there's a certain amount of pressure on this album on that level. And she's the first of the 3 to release a new album since 2023 when their album, The Record, came out and they were sort of catapulted to arena-sized shows and played Saturday Night Live and won 3 Grammys and all of this stuff changed in all of their professional lives, even Phoebe's. So to be the first person coming out with new music after that puts her in a particular spotlight. And what she's chosen to do is a very personal, in some ways quite small and precious feeling album that's a little bit of a kind of, I think of it as almost cinematic. It's almost like a movie telling a very specific story about people who begin the story in different relationships and end up coming together. And we can talk about the details of that.
Before we go any further, maybe pick a track that'll give listeners who haven't heard it yet some sense of Dacus and this record.
Yeah, I mean, Best Guess is kind of the big single and in some ways kind of a summary of the romantic perspective of the album. So maybe we can start there.
You are my best guess.
that song is kind of a signal flag of the second half of the album, when the relationship that's being teased through the first half comes to fruition. And one of the things that's happened in the course of this press cycle is that it's been confirmed by Lucy Dacus in interviews that that relationship is with her Boygenius bandmate, Julian Baker, which was a thing that was rumored for years on the internet, but I always kind of resisted knowing. And hearing the album before that news broke, I kind of didn't want to know, even though I knew those rumors were there, because, of course, when you know who the songs are about, this kind of Taylor Swift-esque parasocial buzz and gossip kicks in. And in some ways, I wanted to hear the album more abstractly than that. But I think I came around over the course of listening to it, in many ways, because Dacus is so fine-grained and thoughtful and sharing her own uncertainties and also knowledge of the delicateness of this situation. I felt like she had the situation under control and I didn't have to feel compelled to worry on their behalf. But it, in some ways, adds to the sweetness of the album if you know the two of their persona. So it's a double-edged aspect of the album. But I'd love to hear what you guys' impression was.
Yeah, I like this album a lot. I mean, I sort of fell in love with Lucy Dacus with her last record, Home Video, which was more sort of childhood autobiographies, a lot about growing up Christian, going to vacation Bible school, which is one of the sort of lyrical inspirations for maybe the best song on that album. And this one took me a little longer to get into. As you mentioned, Carl is sort of like a coming out record, a sort of first Flush of Love record, but also a major label debut. And I think that the sort of the bigness of it took me a while to get through. In some ways, it's lyrically intimate, and I think musically maybe less so. And I think that interplay sometimes I don't quite know where to find my way into the song, but I think there are definitely some incredibly great songs on this. One of them is Ankles, which is, I guess you say, sort of the most like nakedly sexual of it, keeping in mind that Lucy Dacus is a pretty sort of heady literary type. The main criticism I've read of this album is essentially that it's not horny enough. And even when she's singing lyrics like, bite me on the shoulder or pull my hair, it's, scored to like a string quartet and I think hammered dulcimer or something like that. So it's not a sort of, all out like barrage.
Pull me by the ankles to the edge of the bed and take me like you do in your dreams. I'm not gonna stop you. I'm not gonna stop you this time, baby.
But I think it really takes you into the nuances of love and sex and the kind of complications of those rather than just kind of belting out the anthem that we're used to, and the ways that physical and other kinds of intimacy interplay, like in that song Ankles, which is a song about just getting to know another person's body. And, and in this case, Lucy Dacus has said in an interview, she sort of only does friends to lovers. So everyone she's ever been romantically involved with is someone she was a friend of first. So it's about, sort of crossing that boundary with somebody and kind of figuring out, what they're into and what to do and letting your inhibitions go. But then she's also saying, I want you to show me what you mean and help me with the crossword in the morning. And I think there's a real poignant and, maybe sort of unusual in rock music sense of how those two things interplay. And I think, among other things, I've taken to thinking of this as kind of a better Taylor Swift album than at least the last Taylor Swift album. This is not unlike her Tortured Poets department. It has these, great little moments of lyrical insight and intimacy. There's a line from the song Modigliani, which is, you make me homesick for places I've never been before, which Taylor would very happily put in one of her songs, I think. But it is also, very much in the line of the sort of smaller, more delicate stuff that Lucy has been doing over the course of her career.
Yeah, I mean, talking about Ankles, I called it sort of a let's get it on for a shy intellectual personality type.
I love that you called it a gay let's get it on, but not Marvin Gaye, just G-A-Y.
Yeah. But like what's so hot about it on some levels is that it's like very much in, it starts from the beginning saying what if we don't touch? What if we just talk about what we want but can't have? And in the narrative of the album, it falls into that phase where this relationship is not happening and is forbidden on some level. And so you don't even know at the points that seem like explicit moments of sexual contact in the song, whether that's just something they're talking about or something that's happening. Right. And what that line is blurry through the whole song. And there's this intimacy and explicitness to a degree, but also this sense of restraint, holding back. And, I think, for my repressed money, makes it all this steamier.
Well, and that's sort of the dynamic of touring musicians too. Like they had this year when the two of them were on tour with Phoebe Bridgers and Boygenius and together all the time. But other than that, if you're both touring musicians with your separate careers, you're going to be, separated by hundreds or thousands of miles for months at a time. And then you're going to have intense periods of togetherness. The album has that kind of ebb and flow to it as well, I think.
I really admire Lucy Dacus. I'm a fan. And I love the way this record starts. I love the weird, slightly modernist string that sounds like a quartet or anyway, small ensemble string instrumental calliope prelude, which just set the whole thing up for me. And then Big Deal, I believe, is the second song on the record. And is just the Dacusness of Lucy Dacus has just been refined and perfected. And it's in a heavy rotation.
I'm surprised that you're the one who said it first. If you had waited a few years, I would have burst. Everything comes up to the surface in the end. Even the things we'd rather leave unspoken. And we both know that it would never work.
And then, unfortunately, the rest of the album didn't super connect with me. I felt as if it were a little overproduced and over-intellectualized, which is why I want to cede immediately the floor back to you, Carl, because I believe your review, right? Like I believe A, that you think it, and B, that you're probably right, that actually this is a profoundly good record. And though you don't kill it dead by comparing it to Blue or putting it next to Joni Mitchell's Blue, you do put it into dialogue with Joni Mitchell's Blue. So I want to hear more about your love of this record, because I think I can get there, but I'm not there yet.
Yeah, you're not alone. And it's been mentioned already, this sense of that maybe it's a little too lush. It's not as raw as her previous albums. And I think those are fair points in a way. If you think of this as a career move, I think if you think of it as a mood piece that's about a very specific story, it's by a very writerly writer who has her pop moments, but really is a storyteller. To me, it's a headphones album that I want to sit and listen to this story that involves several different relationships, that involves the ebb and flow of a will they, won't they kind of relationship, and then the ultimate kind of embrace of that and the understanding of the risk that's being taken by taking that leap. All of that kind of flows beautifully. The reason I compared it to Blue is that I think Joni Mitchell got criticized or at least warned often when that album was in gestation. It's the very sort of rawness and personal disclosure of it that particularly reminds me, that there's a chance being taken through what the public knows about this story and then what's being disclosed through the course of the album. And then I think the real control of the writer. There are moments I think that go slack, and there are moments where some plays with cliches and things like that don't quite come off as perfectly as intended. So it's not a masterpiece on that level, but I think it does nudge that zone in the sense of really painting this incredibly complex picture and saying things about love that don't get said in most love songs. From the title, Forever is a Feeling, the idea that forever isn't a real thing. Forever is just an emotional experience of something you want, and that the real possibility. She says late in the album on the last track, in fact, she says, "Nothing lasts forever, but let's see how far we get. So when it comes my turn to lose you, I'll have made the most of it." And, it's that sense that this all might crash, but the preciousness of it is increased by that. And so I have this intense experience of the story and of the wisdom of the songwriter through it, and that's what pulls me through. And there'll be time enough for rockin' on another album, you know. There's some more raucous moments on this one too, but they find their moments, and I think it's really an album to sit down and spend close time with.
I just wanted to shout out one more song because we were talking about instrumentation. Sam talked about like a dulcimer sound, or Steve, you mentioned this a bunch of strings on the opening song. I just had to point out, because it's part of a long-running joke on this show, that there is a song, the title song of the album, with gamelan in it. The instrument, the kind of Indonesian percussion instrument that Steve is always accusing me of spending my spare time exclusively listening to. So I just wanted to hear a little bit of the song Forever Is a Feeling with gamelan.
Carl, as always, it's an immense pleasure to talk to you. Will you please pick a song to go out on?
Yeah, I think we should go out on Most Wanted Man, which is the song that Julian Baker herself appears on. So it's kind of the moment that the pseudo rumors effect of this album comes together. But it's also a song that I think belies a little bit these claims that the album is all sleepy lushness. And it kind of starts with this amazing Beatlesque guitar riff and keeps up that kind of pressure throughout, that kind of pop explosion happens. And it's the moment in the storyline, really, that the relationship has come completely to fruition. So that joy is appropriate.
And I should say that we will post a link to Carl's wonderful review. It was on Slate, and we'll have it on our show pages.
Time to write the book on you. Finally, time to write the book on you. I still believe in God. Sometimes it always takes me by surprise to catch myself in the middle of praying. But I thank God for you, and I don't know what else to do. Don't know where the words go, but I still say.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Because Progressive offers discounts for paying in full, owning a home, and more. Plus, you can count on their great customer service to help you when you need it, so your dollar goes a long way. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save on car insurance. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states and situations.
All right, now is the moment in our podcast when we endorse Dana. What do you got?
Steve, my endorsement this week is going to be a little tribute to Val Kilmer, who we talking about on the show this week. Sometimes we do obituary segments, and Val Kilmer would certainly be deserving of one. And we ended up deciding, for various reasons, in part just because if we did an eulogy for every great person who dies pretty soon, this would be the Dead Artist show. We decided not to do Val Kilmer this week, but I do want to send listeners to a really, really great obituary I read on him. There are lots of them out there. It was wonderful to see that the film critic community had so much deep affection for this actor who hasn't been around that much in recent decades. But the one that I wanted to point out is on Criterion.com. It's by David Hudson. The title is Our Huckleberry, Val Kilmer. The Huckleberry line being a line from Tombstone, one of the movies that Hudson pays tribute to here. And it's great. It's a little roundup of some of Kilmer's best roles, and also goes a little bit through his life and the development of his career from his kind of early heartthrob days through the kind of quirky character roles that he started to be drawn to later on. And of course, his Batman, not the most popular Batman, but definitely an indelible one. And David Hudson just really has a nice sense of what set Kilmer apart and made him special. So it's called Our Huckleberry, Val Kilmer. We'll put a link to it on the show page.
Did you happen to see something a friend of mine sent me after Val Kilmer died, which was his Blu-ray, whatever they call it, voiceover narration of a movie? I can't remember what movie it was, but it was written and maybe directed by David Mamet. And it's the section of it where he just slags off on Mamet with no conscience whatsoever. Like, it is so incredibly funny.
And they left it on the commentary
track? It's just
track?
this low mellifluous murmur and one absolutely pitiless dagger after another between
I just
the
found
ribs.
this. Val Kilmer insults David Mamet on Spartan commentary track. It's on IndieWire, it sounds like.
Oh, wow.
It's so funny.
I love a contentious commentary track. I'm surprised I didn't know about this one. But
We'll link to that too as
Oh,
well.
yeah, definitely. Thanks for pointing that one out.
Absolutely. Sam, what do you got?
Okay, I have two performances I want to endorse. One relatively inaccessible, the other extremely accessible. The first is Sarah Snook in The Picture of Dorian Gray, which is currently on Broadway. This is an unusual production in that she is the only actor in it, although not the only person on stage. She is surrounded throughout by a sort of flotilla of black-clad cinematographers and props people, wig steward. And it's this incredibly bravura sort of athletic performance. She apparently practiced the entire thing on a treadmill, Taylor Swift Eras Tour style. And it involves a lot of sort of quick costume changes and different funny voices, but also a ton of working with, I think, up to maybe half a dozen screens, regular cameras on tripods, iPhones, Snapchat filters, all sort of organized around a theme of the narcissism at the heart of the story. But the production itself is possibly a little shaky, but also just astonishing and just as a sheer work of bravura acting. Even the people I know who don't like the show that much, the theater critics who basically came out of the show and was like, just put her name on the Tony now. So it's really something I encourage people to see if they can. The more accessible performance is a TikTok dance to the song Pop Music by M, the sort of new wave classic.
Talk about.
Yes, exactly. So it's apparently a short segment of a longer choreographed piece by this choreographer Molly Long, who runs a dance studio for sort of young dancers in California and is apparently, quite famous on the internet. I have to admit, I'm just sort of learning this as I've tried to figure out why the hundreds of people I have watched do their little 10-second excerpt of this dance are so obsessed with Molly Long. If you know the song, it's this sort of classically new wave, herky-jerky stop-start thing, and the dance sort of reflects that. There's a lot of, sharp, quick movement, stop, sharp, quick movement. But then there's also this sort of incredibly fluid, freewheeling, kind of windmilling stuff that goes in that's just, limbs going everywhere. I the first time I saw it, it's like, how is that body working? Like, how is it, how are they doing this? And, so it's not a sort of typical, like, Charli D'Amelio TikTok dance where, like, anybody could do it. And this is something that's really hard. And the comments in these TikToks are often, I practiced 100 times before I got this, but it's just like mesmerizing to watch. I would not surprise me if I had seen 100 of these by now, certainly dozens and dozens. You can keep, flipping through them 10 seconds at a time. So I would recommend looking that up, but make sure you have a few minutes to spare. So again, it's endorsing Sarah Snook on Broadway in The Portrait of Dorian Gray and Pop Music on TikTok, wherever your phone is.
That's awesome. I really want to see that Snook now. Maybe I'll motivate to do it. So it's always that funny thing where, well, a couple things. One is that generationally, you now have young people in their 20s who grew up in households in which, Big Star and Guided by Voices and fill in the blank, The Replacements and the Strokes or whatever, were just on in the background all the time. And those influences were absorbed in early childhood and not rejected by some people who then picked up guitars and started making music. And for someone, my generation, for whom that music was my music, I have such mixed feelings about it in one sense because, like, I want the hit again and I want it from, like, 20-year-old blood, like vampirically. I want it from actual young people. And at the same time, I'm like, I could list the influences with 3 bars in or whatever. Like this dialectic just explodes completely on, or opposition explodes completely on contact with Sharp Pins, a band. I'm not 100% sure where they're from. There's not a ton of info on them on the internet, though I think they're going to get bigger. It's their second album just came out called Radio DDR. Pitchfork went crazy for it. A friend of mine recommended it to me. I think this is an astonishing record. I do not care that the lead guy, whose name is Kai Slater, he looks like he's about 14 years old. I do not care that he worships at the altar of Guided by Voices, The Strokes, and Alex Chilton, and there's a little undigested quality to some of those influences. I actually think there's a wild originality behind his songwriting, his musicianship. He's very confident. Radio DDR, I would start with one track in particular, and if that doesn't get you, you're dead to me. It's Sycophant. Is just an amazing, amazing song. So check it out, Radio DDR by the band Sharp Pins. Sam, thanks so much for coming in and joining us on the show.
Thank you guys so much for having me. It was a blast.
What a total pleasure. So the deal from now on is if we have you on the show, you show up. Right?
Of course, yeah. Right. We'll go into our little hidden carol in the bowels of Slate and do this again.
Yeah, talk about ephemera, right? And Dana, always a pleasure.
Total pleasure.
You will find links to some of the things we talked about today at our show page. That's slate.com/culturefest, and you can email us at culturefest@slate.com. Our introductory music is by the composer Nicholas Pertel. Our research document this week was prepared by Sophie Summergrad, and our producer is Jessamine Molly. For Sam Adams and Dana Stevens, I'm Stephen Metcalf. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you soon.